Hello and welcome. This video today is entitled the Eclipse of God, and hopefully I can get into the reasons why. I have to excuse the panting of my dog here. He's right next to me. He wouldn't lie in his little shady spot, so that's what you can hear. But people will remember the 1995 film The Usual Suspects, and in it the character Verbal Kint, I think his name was in the film, when he was being investigated by the police, he said something very interesting, that the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world that he didn't exist. He wasn't the first person to say that, actually. The French writer Charles Baudelaire said something along the same lines, that it is the essence of the devil, Satan. The great trick is to convince the world that he doesn't really exist. That's how he'll succeed. And rather than being some sort of ominous representation of a dragon and horns and breathing fire and scary entity, the most productive way for the devil, if he exists, would be to trick everyone into believing that he doesn't exist, and to get everyone on board with whatever agenda that he wants. Now, the last 2 years we've had the COVID-19 restrictions. We've had the climate crisis has been booming before and after COVID, the COVID crisis. We're now having the economic effects of both these assaults on fuel costs, on inflation, food costs. We've now got possible food shortages, and of course, what joins all these, and also the war in Ukraine as well, of course, but what joins all these things that are going on in society is the idea that science, that technology, that politicians who dealing with the economics, like the Chancellor of Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, and people like him, these things are the only thing we can rely on. On the side of that is everyone has to fear, be frightened of COVID, be frightened of the climate. I mean, apparently there's a climate warming this week I've seen on the internet from the Met Office, basically saying it's too warm, get indoors. Well, where I am in Scotland, it doesn't seem too bad, and when I was in Turkey a few years ago, it was very, very hot, but I've never seen any warnings then for not to go. So there's always this presence of everyone should be frightened all the time, and that science or the politicians are the only people that can save us. Now, I've talked a lot about the idea of technology and science being false idols, so to speak, that we use, especially in terms of mental health and psychotherapy, the idolatry of science and technology to make us better people, happier people, more attractive people, etc., etc. it is a very prominent facet of the modern world. People take it for granted. People take it for granted that psychopharmacology, antidepressants or other psychiatric drugs, or technological-based psychotherapies, or methods are the only way to bring us out of our despair. And if you look through my other videos, I've had a lot to say about that it's highly problematic, especially when it pertains to the human condition. Ultimately, it's anti-biblical, so to speak. Of course, because I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but the idea of being fearful is in the Bible that the instructions are completely opposite. Is not to fear and to trust in God, because ultimately God will prevail and help you through the trials of life. Whereas it's very interesting that on the modern side at the moment, where many commentators are talking about what we're going through is a battle between good and evil. All they're saying is trust the science, trust the politicians, trust technology for the climate, trust the science of the climate, trust the science of the COVID. These are the only things that will stop us being fearful. Because if not, we should just be fearful. If you haven't been triple jabbed, be fearful. As Klaus Schwab says, until everyone is vaccinated, no one's safe. That's very, very threatening. So, I came across a book by Martin Buber. He was a German philosopher, and he died, I think, maybe in the 1960s, maybe. And he's a Jewish philosopher, German Jew, and he had a lot to say about philosophy, religion and psychotherapy, and he's very popular in certain branches of psychotherapy, existential psychotherapy to be precise. And I've certainly found him very interesting to read and think about for many years now. And he had a lot to say about the rise of science, technology, etc., etc., in relation to human being, interpersonal. And I'll just find the quote. This is a quote from his book, The Eclipse of God. And he says, or this is from the introduction actually. The introduction was written by, who was it written by, the introduction? Lerona Batinsky of Princeton University. It's a very good introduction. She said, as Buber puts it, for the I of the primary word, I, thou, is a different I from that of the primary word, I, it. I am different in the I, thou relationship because the other affects me. In an I, it relationship, in contrast, I understand myself and act as an isolated being, unaffected by the greater reality of which I am part. This brings us to the eclipse of God. In the essays in this volume, Buber describes God as the primary thou. God is the greater transcendent reality against which all of human life takes place. The eclipse of God is the eclipse of the possibility of experiencing human life in relation to this greater reality. In this sense, the eclipse of God is also the eclipse of the human. Let us turn to Buber's own words from the second essay of this volume, Religion and Reality. And this is Buber's words, open quotes. Eclipse of the light of heaven, eclipse of God. Such indeed is the character of the historic hour through which the world is passing. An eclipse of the sun is something that occurs between the sun and our eyes, not in the sun itself, but one misses everything when one insists on discovering within earthly thought the power that unveils the mystery. He who refuses to submit himself to the effective reality of transcendence as such, our vis-a-vis, contributes to the human responsibility for the eclipse, end quote. And she goes on, the person in the introduction. 3 points are important here. First, according to Buber, our inability to see God does not mean that God is not there, just as the sun still exists when the moon blocks it in a solar eclipse. Second, seeing God's reality is not merely a matter of adjusting human psychology, just as seeing the sun during a solar eclipse is not merely a matter of adjusting our eyesight. Finally, just as the moon blocks the sun while nowhere destroying the sun's reality in a solar eclipse, so too, Buber suggests, something literally blocks our relation to God in our day. What stands in the way of the human being and God in the modern world? God is eclipsed in the modern world, argues Buber, by the predominance of instrumentality, the glorification of usefulness, which turns human beings into objects among other objects. Modern political and economic arrangements treat the individual person as an object among others to be manipulated and regulated by the modern nation state. Modern science, philosophy and even religion similarly deny the simultaneous singularity and interconnectedness of individuals. Buber argues that we live in an age in which knowledge and the use of knowledge to control our lives are the dominant values. This means that our relations are relations of usefulness, of instrumentality, but not mutuality. For Buber, we have lost access to God's primary thou because I-it relations eclipse our access to I-thou relations. It is important to be clear, however, that Buber does not think we can or even should dispense with the many gifts of modernity, such as individual right or modern science. He does not wish to suggest that modern medicine for its errors in its attempt to use scientific knowledge to eradicate disease. Rather, the problem is that the exclusive focus on scientific knowledge and instrumentality blocks, as the moon blocks the sun in a solar eclipse, the possibility of a relationship to God. So, you think about what Buber says, and this is now 22, in relation to mental health, the technological, pharmaceutical methods to cure our malaise, and now this rise of the biosecurity state, the decade of the vaccines, as Bill Gates talks about, the need for science and technology to dictate our lives in every minute way. Carbon footprint, social credit scores, digital cash, track and trace, vaccine mandates, big data emanating from nursery to the grave, i.e. in schools, assessing children on the possibility of their sexuality, their trauma, and interventions being put in place to correct these anomalies in people's existence. And so Buber hits the spot. I think he could see what was coming, and this creates a reality, a human existence where we relate to the world as an I, a person, and an it. Everything's just a very impersonal a relationship, and it's very interesting, of course, the whole modus operandi of the COVID thing, of lockdowns, not seeing people, not mourning people, totally deconstructing the ordinary ways of living. Shaking hands was replaced by elbows, mask wearing. Everything was orchestrated to take us away from a human flourishing, and as Buber would say, take us away from the possibility of an I thou, because he would see in the relationship between two people to be totally present with them in an everyday way, but also in a psychotherapeutic way, is getting close to God. It's opening a clearing for the presence of God in the world, and by putting in its place science and objectivity, closes that space down. But many people, of course, don't see any great problem with it. They don't see any issue with that. And I suppose that's where the usual suspects quote at the beginning comes in. If what we're doing as a human civilization is all about destroying this I thou and the eclipse, ultimately the eclipse of God, through these not unharmful practices of science, because science is a double-edged sword. Science can be used for good, but especially it can be used for evil, as we've seen throughout history. If we get into that position and we don't question it, then if it is a trick of the devil, then he's done a very good thing. And especially if we're forbidden from talking about it, or cancelled, or the online harm bill comes to fruition, we won't be allowed to question vaccines, for example, or the climate science. We'll be regarded as extremists. That'd be a great thing for the prince of this world, so to speak. And we have to. There's a very interesting biblical reference to what I'm talking about. This is in Colossians chapter 2. I'll read from verse 3 to 8. Very interesting. This is what's said. In whom are hid all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. And I say this, lest any man should beguile you with enticing words. For though I am absent in the flesh, yet am I with you in spirit, joying and beholding your order and the steadfastness of your faith in Christ. As ye have therefore received Jesus Christ the Lord, so walk ye in him, rooted and built in him, and stabilized in the faith as ye have been taught, abounding therein with thanksgiving. Beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ. And I think, and there's many other references in the Bible to this idea of relying on the things of men, of things of this world, to stop us feeling anxious, or to make us happy, or to rely purely on the materialistic saviours, the idolatry of the things of this world, is a very dangerous thing, because it takes us away from this. It eclipses God, as Buber would say. You just got to look at this, the infamous in Genesis, in the Bible, about the Tower of Babel, where it was building this tower to reach heaven. Man becomes God. Man becomes the master of existence, and of course the Tower of Babel was destroyed. And there's often this thing when you talk about between good and evil, it's hiding in plain sight. They have to tell you what to do. And it's very convenient when you point things out, like the eclipse of God, the use of technology and science to take away our human flourishing, etc., etc., and vain deceit and philosophy is the antithesis to what it is to be a Christian, for example. To be mocked for that, and ultimately, well, in the legislation that the UK government want to put forward is that such ideas are extremist. So the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was to make people believe he didn't exist. There was nothing to worry about, nothing to complain about. You're just a crank. I think we should be wary of that to a great degree. It's very convenient to be able to mock people for criticising the idolatry of science, the idolatry of technology when it comes to COVID, pandemics, climate. It's very convenient that things have evolved to this point where you know, where there's a danger of being taken out of society for speaking up and living our life how we want to live it. I don't want to take a vaccine. I don't want to stop driving my car because I don't believe the climate thing. I don't want to, you know, not eat meat. You know, because these things are all so intangible. Because ordinary people can't see these things. So it's very difficult to argue against them. And all these scientists saying we have the data, we have the knowledge, and this is the case. And this, you just got to do this. Of course, if you can do a little bit of digging, you can find the data. And with the COVID thing, the narratives fallen to pieces. And they wanted us to believe. They wanted us to believe this terrible thing about COVID, and the data at every turn has shown that it has been a huge trick in some sense. Some would say to crash the economy and to bring in this great reset. So yeah, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was to make the world believe he didn't exist. And ultimately this leads to the eclipse of God. So this video is just food for thought. Food for thought for people to think about it in terms of a religious or the spiritual. Think about exactly. I mean, fine, if there was a fiery, devilish dragon terrorising the world, we could really have a purchase on fighting back against something. But what happens when this vain philosophy, vain deceit, this science, this man-made, man will be God, takes over? Is it harmless? Or is it eclipsing something far more important? It's a fantastic trick when you think about it. And if we don't stop and think about this, where does it lead? 3 weeks to flatten the curve, three injections, another booster. It's only cash. Oh, you don't need to own anything really. You don't need to drive, you don't need to travel, you don't need to go on holiday, you don't need to eat meat, you don't have to heat your home, you don't have to live for the greater good. So that's all I'm going to say today. Bye bye.